If you will, turn over to Psalm 83, and we will begin here a song, a psalm of Asaph. Now, this psalm begins by focusing on the impending attack that is to come upon Jerusalem and the land of Israel at the close of the age. And this psalm concludes by revealing the punishments that God will unleash on the beast and all of the nations that follow him, that he conquers and subjugates. Going on, do not keep silent, O God. Do not hold your peace, and do not be still, O God. For behold, your enemies make a tumult, and those who hate you have lifted up their head. The New American Standard says, they have exalted themselves. The New Living Translation, they are rising up. They're beginning to rise up. Now, the majority of the descendants of Judah who practice Judaism today believe that they are all in very good standing with God. They claim to be his people. And they believe that they will never again be removed from the promised land as they await the arrival of the Messiah. That's what they believe. They're very adamant about that. And when we look at some of the things we've covered over the Middle Eastern prophecy, some of the miracles that God has worked, it certainly seems that way. He's taken care of one miracle after another for the establishment of that nation, which had to be because he prophesied it. It has to be there. And he's made certain that it's there. But again, they think that everything's hunky-dory till the Messiah comes. Hence, they will appeal, as verses 1 and 2 go on to show here, as we've already read. Don't keep silent. Don't hold back. Your enemies are doing this. They will appeal, those followers of Judaism. They will appeal to God to take action for them, to protect them when their belligerent enemies become allied with the armies of the beast. They will not realize that God will be responsible for assembling all those nations, those enemies, and bringing them against Jerusalem, even though the prophets mention it on a number of occasions. First of all, let's go back, hold your place in Psalm 83, but back in Zechariah, one of the scriptures we go to quite frequently about what happens at the end of the age, Zechariah 14, verse 1. The New Living Translation has, "Watch, for the day of the eternal is coming, when your possessions," and speaking of those who were in Jerusalem, "when your possessions will be plundered," or the New English Translation has, "will be divided as plunder right in front of you." Everything that you have, what do you have in possession now? It's going to be stripped. Going on in verse 2 in the New English Translation, "For God is speaking here, I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to wage war." God takes responsibility for this. The city will be taken. It will be. No question about it. No maybe here. It will be taken. Its houses plundered and the women raped. Then half of the city will go into exile. That is, they will be enslaved, and they will go into exile. But the remainder of the people will not be taken away. So there will be Jews who remain there, but enslaved, as other prophets bring out that we'll come to a little later on. All right, so they're appealing here in Psalm 83, don't keep silent. God, don't hold you need to do something. In verse 3, Tanakh goes on, they plot craftily against your people. Take counsel against your treasured ones. They're plotting against us, these followers of Judaism in the land of Israel are saying. God has made very clear that his people, his treasured ones, as that's mentioned here, are those who fully commit their lives to him. Those are the only ones who can be his treasured ones, those who completely surrender to him. By obeying him with all their heart, they prevail with him and live up to the name of the possessors of the land, Israel. Prevailers with God. That's the meaning. Prevailer with El is the meaning of Israel. To prevail with him, they do what he requires of them. Back in Exodus chapter 19, God made this promise to the descendants of Jacob. Exodus 19, and in verse 3. Begin in verse 3. And Moses went up to God, and the Eternal called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. That's all of the tribes, not just Judah, it's all of the tribes. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. To be a special treasure requires obeying him and keeping his covenant. He makes that very clear here. Now, even though they have failed to do all that is required of them, the practitioners of Judaism today believe that they are in good standing as God's treasured ones, because they think all they got to do is get the third temple built and then the Messiah is going to show up. You know, this is the mentality. They and the rest of Jacob's descendants, those who were part of the northern kingdom, are God's treasured ones. They are. They still are considered his treasured ones, but they must face the consequences of their failure from not doing as it says here, obeying his voice and keeping his covenant. They have to do that before they can receive his mercy and receive the land of Israel forever, because it's going to be taken away from them again. It's going to be taken away. They're not going to have control over it again. Now, even though Israel historically agreed to all that God required of them, they said it 3 times. You know, go back and read there in Exodus 20 and 21. Oh, all that God has said, yes, we'll do it, Moses. Yes, 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 we'll do everything. They failed to do so, as we know. And they failed to do so many times throughout the 40 years they spent in the wilderness. We have the record in the book of Exodus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. Then, after entering the promised land, they again disobeyed God multiple times throughout the period of the Judges. God punished them for their disobedience by sending foreign powers into the land of Israel and subjugating and brutally oppressing the descendants of Jacob. In fact, let's go over to Judges chapter 2 and note some of these things. Judges chapter 2 and in verse 11. I'll read from the Tanakh translation. And the Israelites, this was after the death of Joshua and the death of the elders that outlived Joshua. Okay, so the leaders that were, in right standing with God, they were gone. The Israelites did what was offensive to the Eternal. They worshiped the Baalim and forsook the Eternal, the God of their fathers who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They followed other gods from among the gods of the people around them and bowed down to them. They provoked the Eternal. They forsook the Eternal and worshipped Baal and the Ashtaroth. Then the Eternal was incensed at Israel, and he handed them over to foes who plundered them. He surrendered them to their enemies on all sides, and they could no longer hold their own against their enemies. And of course, we have several times that happen here in this next chapter, in chapter 3. We come down to chapter 4, and we'll go to verse 1. I'll read from the New Living Translation. It says, after Ehud's death. Now, Ehud was the one who killed Eglon, the king of Moab, if you'll remember, with the dagger. He, Eglon must have weighed 400 pounds, because when he pushed that dagger into him, his hand even got caught up in the fat. And, you couldn't even see the handle of the dagger. This guy was really huge. But he killed him, okay? That was Ehud who did that. But after his death, because God then took, he took away the Moabite problem that they had, the Israelites again did evil in the Eternal sight. So the Eternal turned them over to King Jabin of Hatzor, a Canaanite king. The commander of his army was Sisera. Now, I won't go through all of that. Let's go down to, at least right now, let's go to Judges chapter 6. And so we find another time afterward. In Judges 6, verse 1, then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Eternal. So the Eternal delivered them into the hand of Midian for 7 years. And see, this went on and on, a number of times throughout the period of the Judges. Just as he punished his people in the past for their disobedience, God will again do so by sending the beast and all of those nations he conquers that he, takes for himself or that simply voluntarily join him. They will come and conquer and afflict the descendants of Judah in Jerusalem in the land of Israel for a period of 42 months or 3.5 years. And all of that happens, as we know, at the very close of the age. Now, let's go back to Psalm 83 and verse 4. All right, continuing on, they, God's enemies, they have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation. Or the New International says, let us destroy them as a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. Prevailers with God, that the name prevailers with God will be remembered no more. The earth, as we just read a few minutes ago in Exodus 19, verse 5, as well as back in Psalm 24, verse 1, the earth belongs to God. It is His and everything in it. It is God who has determined the boundaries of all nations. Once the descendants of Adam and Eve greatly multiplied, God separated them. That's what we're told. He separated them, very likely in the same way that he separated the descendants of Noah at the Tower of Babel, through languages, giving new languages to many of them. Before he did so, God had already determined, back in Deuteronomy chapter 32, hold your place in Psalm, obviously, but in Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, we found that God had already determined the locations of the borders of the nations to where they would all go, and all of this was done before the flood. Here in verse 8 of Deuteronomy 32, it says, when the Most High divided their inheritance to the nations. So God had in from the beginning, there were going to be multiple nations from all of the different the descendants of their ancestors Adam and Eve. So when he divided it, he separated the sons of Adam. And when he did so, what did he do? He set the boundaries of the peoples or the nations according to the number of the children of Israel. He knew ultimately how many he was going to have in that one particular area. So we are told very clearly from what Moses told Israel there at the close of the book of Deuteronomy that God's primary nation is Israel. It's his primary nation. The borders of Israel were determined by God to be his land that he would give to the peoples who would properly represent him to all other nations by being faithful to him, by doing what he told them to do. Therefore, no other nation can legitimately claim land within the borders of Israel. They can't claim it. Any peoples who attempt to claim or to lay claim to that land and destroy the name of Israel, again, prevailers with L, are therefore the enemies of God. They are, because of what they're trying to do, to steal his land for themselves, they are his enemies. So back again here in Psalm 83, verse 5. New English Translation has, yes, they devise a unified strategy. That is, the enemies of God devise a unified strategy. They form an alliance against you, God, against you. That is, they are all in agreement, every one. They will take possession of the land. That's what their agreement is. By doing so, they will actually be stealing property that God has claimed strictly for himself and promised to those who prevail with him. And those who attack the land are definitely not prevailing with God. They're warring against him. Going on in verse 6 in the New English translation, it includes this unified group, this alliance, includes the tents, better in the Revised English Bible, which is families, or the Tanakh, which is clans. It includes the clans or the families of Edom. Remember, Edom had 12 descendants, 12 sons that were his descendants. The clans of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, Gabal, Ammon, and Amalek, Philistia, and the inhabitants of Tyre. This alliance, which is a confederation of Islamic nations, we all have to understand that. They're a confederation of Islamic nations, but they were headed by the very first one mentioned here, the descendants of Esau, Edom. He's the one that is really ramrodding this alliance. They are joined by other peoples, many of whom are related to Esau through ancestral intermarriages. Other allies are the peoples who will then, at the end, be living in those lands that were anciently inhabited by the Philistines as well as the Phoenicians up in Tyre and Sidon. Many of those will be the descendants of Esau and Ishmael, or are the descendants of Esau and Ishmael. Now, Moab here refers to the area of what we call Jordan today. Okay? Moab would be equivalent to Jordan. The Hagrites, which were the descendants of the children that Hagar bore after Ishmael, they lived, according to the Scripture, east of Gilead, which we know is, up on the eastern side of the Jordan River, which was territory that was given to half the tribe of Manasseh and Reuben and Gad. Anyway, Gilead, they lived east of Gilead, which would put them into the area of what is today modern Saudi Arabia. Gabal refers to an area in the Sinai that was part of ancient Idumea. Okay, that's in the Sinai, east of or west of the Mount Seir area, southwest of that area. Ammon refers to Syria today, because that was the territory that Ammon had. Amalek refers to the most incorrigible of Esau's descendants, who seem to be concentrated in the areas of ancient Philistia and Tyre, which today are the Gaza Strip and Lebanon, from where Hamas and Hezbollah have been attacking the Jews in the land of Israel for the last several decades. And still are. Okay, hasn't ended. And they're not going to be put down before the end either. I mean, despite what plans may be in the works of, bringing peace in and a great resort on the Gaza, Mediterranean coast, it ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. Going on in verse 8, New English translation. Even Assyria has allied with them. Even Assyria. Now, obviously, there's not an Assyria today. But, as we know, Babylon the Great is often represented as Assyria in end-time prophecies. The entire vision of Nahum involves Nineveh, which was the capital of the Assyrian Empire, the primary capital of the Assyrian Empire, and it reveals, the vision of Nahum reveals how Babylon the Great will be destroyed at the close of the age in the same manner that the great city of Nineveh, the city of the capital of the Assyrians, was destroyed anciently. The beast is even identified. Let's go over to Isaiah chapter 10. The beast is even identified, as we've gone over many times, as the king of Assyria by Isaiah, who shows that once God finishes using the beast to punish the descendants of Judah for their hypocrisy, that is, for claiming to be his people, but not acknowledging Jesus Christ as the prophet like Moses, that they were required to hear and obey, as Moses said, as God said, and Moses recorded back in Deuteronomy 18. Once God does that, he will punish the beast. Once those in that land of Israel are punished, he's going to turn around and punish the beast. Here in Isaiah 10, verse 5, woe to Assyria. or King James better, O Assyrian, the rod of my anger, and the staff in whose hand is my indignation. I will send him. So once again, just like Zechariah chapter 14, verse 2, God says he's going to be the one that brings the enemies of Israel against them at the close of the age. I will send him against an ungodly, better in the King James, hypocritical, because it's hypocritical to claim to be God's treasured people, God's people, when you won't accept the Messiah that he sent. That's hypocritical. I will send him against a hypocritical nation and against the people of my wrath. I will give him charge to seize the spoil, to take the prey, and to tread them down like the mire of the streets. In verse 7, the New Living Translation goes on, but the king of Assyria will not understand that he is my tool, God says. His mind does not work that way. No, because he's possessed, his mind is possessed by Satan the devil. Nope, his plan is simply to destroy. Abaddon, Apollyon, Satan's name. He's a destroyer. His plan is simply to destroy, to cut down nation after nation. All right, we go down to verse 12, and we find once he has accomplished what God wants done there at Jerusalem and Judea, therefore it shall come to pass when the Eternal has performed all his work, or carried out all his purpose, the Tanakh translation has, on Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, that he will say, God will say, I will punish the fruit of the arrogant heart of the king of Assyria and the glory of his haughty looks. All we have to do is go back and compare this to what we find about the beast in the book of Revelation, as well as even in Daniel. You find the kind of mind that this individual has. There's no question this is the beast, the king of Assyria. Assyria represents Babylon the Great. Okay, the beast power. So we go back to Psalm 83 and verse 8. Even Assyria has allied with them, lending its strength, again, the New English translation, lending its strength to the descendants of Lot. Selah. Think about that. He's going to lend his strength to the descendants of Lot. The beast, who Daniel tells us back in Daniel chapter 11, is the king of the north, will ally with the entirety of the confederation of Islamic nations surrounding Israel and will provide them with the ability to finally gain control of the promised land. Unlike all other nations that will be militarily conquered by the beast, that will not, submit to him right off the bat, they're going to be conquered by the beast. And unlike those nations, the territories of his Islamic allies will not be attacked and occupied by his armies. That's not going to happen. How do we know? Well, Daniel chapter 11. Daniel 11 and verse 41. Verse 40 talks about the time of the end, the king of the south, and so forth. And, again, there is no king of the south. Now, it's all happened. We're waiting for the king of the north to finish what verse 40 was talking about here. Well, he will enter in to many countries and overflow and pass over. And in verse 41, he shall also enter the glorious land. He wasn't able to do that back in World War II. Wasn't allowed to do that. And many countries shall be overthrown, but he doesn't list all of them, but these shall escape. That is, they're not going to be attacked. They're not going to be militarily occupied by the armies of the beast. These shall escape from his hand. He's not going to take control of them. He's going to be allied with them. Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. So we're told that all of that area on the east side of the Jordan River, beast is not going to go over there. They're going to be allied with him. There's no reason for him to go in militarily and conquer them because they're going to be part of the system. Now, going back to Psalm 83, the remainder of this psalm, beginning in verse 9, reveals how God will punish the nations that ally themselves with the beast and attempt to utterly destroy the name Israel, as we've already seen. Verse 9, New Living Translation, do to them, this is the appeal of primarily at this point the descendants of Judah who are practicing Judaism because they are, legitimately thinking what they're doing is right. They're not the secular, the secular Jews don't seem to be involved so much in this because they don't really care. And a lot of them are atheists. It's incredible how this can be, but nonetheless. Do to them as you did to the Midianites, and as you did to Sisera and Jabin at the Kishon River. They were destroyed at Endor, and their decaying corpses fertilized the soil because there were so many of them that died. Now, chronologically, God's judgment on the Midianites followed his judgment on Jabin, king of Canaan, and Sisera, who was the commander of the Canaanite army, of Jabin's army. After allowing the Canaanites to cruelly oppress Israel for 20 years, God helped Deborah and Barak to fulfill his will and destroy Jabin, Sisera, and their army. Let's go back to Judges chapter 4 and notice some of these things because there are some very interesting parallels with that and what happens at the close of this age. Judges chapter 4, verse 13. I'll read from Tanakh. So Sisera ordered all his chariots. He's the primary commander-in-chief of the army. So Sisera ordered all his chariots, 900 iron chariots, and all the troops he had to move from Harosheth Goim to the Wadi Kishon, or the river Kishon. Then Deborah said to Barak, Up, this is the day on which the Eternal will deliver Sisera into your hands. The Eternal is marching before you. Barak charged down Mount Tabor, followed by the 10,000 men, and the Eternal threw Sisera. No, God does this. The Eternal threw Sisera and all his chariots and army into a panic before the onslaught of Barak. Sisera leaped from his chariot and fled on foot. As Barak pursued the chariots and the soldiers as far as Harosheth Goim, all of Sisera's soldiers fell by the sword. Not a man was left. Sisera, meanwhile, had fled on foot to the tent of Jael, wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was a friendship between King Jabin of Hatzor and the family of Heber the Kenite. Jael, his wife, came out to greet Sisera and said to him, Come in, my lord, come in here. Do not be afraid. So he entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. Then I'll skip down to verse 21. After he was asleep, then Jael, wife of Heber, took a tent pin or tent peg and grasped the mallet. When he was fast asleep from exhaustion, she approached him stealthily and drove the pin through his temple so that it went down to the ground. Thus he died. Now, verse 23 goes on in the New Living Translation. So, on that day, Israel saw God defeat. God is the one who defeated. God defeated Jabin. And again, back up here in verse 15. How? By causing his army to panic, his army was destroyed. Now, Jabin continued to live a few years, or maybe a few months, we're not told, but basically he was stripped with all of his power, and he was forced to whatever was left of his his small company, probably that was there for protecting him, all went back to outside of the land of Israel. But it says here, and from that time on, Israel became stronger and stronger against King Jabin until they finally destroyed him. Again, we're not told how long that took. All right, but that was the first of the two things mentioned here, the defeat of Jabin, king of Canaan. Now we move on to what happened 47 years later, because this brings us to the time of Gideon. God used Gideon to help fulfill his will when he orchestrated the slaughter, the outright slaughter of 120,000 Midianites, joined with some Amalekites and other eastern allies. We're told in chapter 7, verse 12. So there were Amalekites mixed in with the Midianites at this point. To ensure that it would be very obvious to all of Israel that God was responsible for their deliverance, he required Gideon to reduce the total number of his men from 32,000 to 300. Send all the rest of them home. We only need 300 for this because I'm the one that's going to defeat them. You're just a tool, Gideon. What you're doing is just a tool so that what I plan for them will work out. So after doing so, Gideon divided his 300 men into 3 groups of 100 and then surrounded the Midianites during the night. Let's go to chapter 7, verse 19. Here in verse 19, I'll read from the New Living Translation. It was just after midnight, after the changing of the guard, when Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the Midianite camp. Suddenly, they blew the ram's horns and broke their clay jars. Then all 3 groups blew their horns and broke their jars. They held the blazing torches in their left hands and the horns in their right hands, and they all shouted, "A sword for the Eternal and for Gideon." Each man stood at his position around the camp and watched as all the Midianites rushed around in a panic, shouting as they ran to escape. When the 300 Israelites blew their ram's horns, the Eternal, note again, who's responsible? The Eternal caused the warriors in the camp to fight against each other with their swords. Those who were not killed fled to places as far away as Beth Shittah near Zererah and to the border of Abel Meholah near Tabbath. Now, again, back in Psalm 83, now we're going to continue in Judges, hold your place there, but here in Psalm 83, again, in verse 9, it talks about the Kishon River, and in verse 10, it talks about Endor, two specific places. Now, it's very interesting that the location of the defeat of the Canaanites and the defeat of the Midianites was in the Jezreel Valley. That's where this took place, both of those events. The Kishon River flows northwest from around, I think it's Mount Gilboa, and it flows to the northwest and eventually dumps into the Mediterranean. City of Haifa is built around it now, so the Kishon goes into the Mediterranean there. But it flows through the western part, the west central part of the Jezreel Valley. All right, so that's given us a location. Endor is located about halfway or midway between Megiddo and the Jordan River to the east. It will be in the Jezreel Valley where Christ will destroy the armies of both the beast as well as the armies that will invade from the northeast that initially fight each other and then join forces together to attempt to fight Christ at his return. Okay, that's where they're going to be slaughtered. Remember, there's going to be a river of blood up to the horses' bridles. It flows for over 100 miles. And, of course, it's going to be flowing primarily. Some of it may be going to the Mediterranean on the Kishon, but a lot of it's going to be going to the Jordan River, to the east. So that there's a lot of blood that's going to be shed. Back in Revelation chapter 19 and verse 19, here John in vision said, "I saw the beast and the kings of the earth," note that, the kings, plural, of the earth, "and their armies gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army." That is, they're going to try to fight and prevent Christ from returning and establishing his rule. In Zechariah chapter 14, Zechariah tells us what happens to that army that is assembled there. Zechariah 14, verse 12, and this shall be the plague with which the Eternal will strike all the people who fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall dissolve while they stand on their feet. Their eyes shall dissolve in their sockets, and their tongues shall dissolve in their mouths. Verse 13 goes on in the New International. On that day, people will be stricken by the Eternal, the same one who put the panic among the Canaanites, the army of Jabin, the same one who fought and turned the Midianites against themselves. In the same place, the Jezreel Valley, they will be stricken by the Eternal with a great panic. They will seize each other by the hand and attack one another. Again, exactly like he did with the Midianites. And there was a tremendous amount, as we, again, read about how the land is going to be, there's going to be so much carnage that's going to fertilize the ground. There were 120,000 Midianites and Amalekites and all that were slaughtered historically. Back in Psalm 83 again, verse 11, the appeal now is, make their nobles, Tanakh simply has, make their great men like Oreb and Zeeb. Yes, all their princes, make all their princes like Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, let us take for ourselves the pastures of God for a possession. Okay, they're laying claim to God's land. The great men of the Midianites were their two generals, Oreb and Zeeb. They were the generals of the Midianites. And the princes, or kings, as they're called back in Judges, they're two kings, Zebah and Zalmunna. They were all of them put to death, each and every one. Now, back in Judges 7, where we held our place, verse 25, Tanakh states, they, and this is referring to something a little bit earlier, the Ephraimites, because the Ephraimites wanted a piece of the action, okay? And so the Ephraimites pursued the Midianites, the ones who got away. 120,000 were killed, but there were still more that got away. And so the Midianites were, pursued by the Ephraimites, and they captured Midian's two generals, Oreb and Zeeb. They killed, the Ephraimites killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and they killed Zeeb at the winepress of Zeeb, and they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeeb from the other side of the Jordan to Gideon. Now, while the Ephraimites were in pursuit of and capturing the Midianite generals, Gideon was in pursuit of the kings of the Midianites. And so we go to chapter 8 here of Judges and verse 10. Judges 8, verse 10. I'll read from the New Living Translation. By this time, Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with 15,000 warriors, all that remained of the allied armies of the east, for 120,000 had already been killed. Gideon circled around by the caravan route east of Nobah and Jogbehah, taking the Midianite army by surprise. Zebah and Zalmunna, the two Midianite kings, fled, but Gideon chased them down and captured all their warriors, or better in the Tanakh translation, and threw the whole army into panic. And so that 15,000-man army panicked. And then let's skip down to verse 21. Latter part of verse 21, New English translation. So Gideon killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent-shaped, note this, the crescent-shaped ornaments which were on the necks of their camels. Just as the kings of the Midianites conquered much of the land of Israel, the beast will conquer Jerusalem and take for himself the land of Israel. Just as the Midianite kings shared the land with their Amalekite allies, so the beast will allow the confederation of Islamic nations, whose religion and God are symbolized by a crescent moon, just like what was on the camels' necks, to take over and to abuse that land. Yet after the bowl plagues have been poured out, the beast will be destroyed just as surely as the kings of Midian were killed. In fact, back in Revelation, well, let me just turn over there. Revelation 19, we read verse 19, but let's read verse 20. It says, the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet. Then it goes on to say, these two were cast alive into the lake of fire. So there were two kings of Midian. And now we have two individuals who are largely responsible for what happens at the close of the age, the false prophet and the beast. Both of them are put to death by Jesus Christ. Back in Isaiah chapter 10. Isaiah chapter 10. Because interestingly, there is more here about Assyria, the beast, and what happens to him. Here in Isaiah 10, verse 24. Therefore, thus says the Lord eternal of hosts, O my people who dwell in Zion, do not be afraid of the Assyrian. Don't be afraid of the beast. He shall strike you with a rod. That is, he's going to come in and he's going to do some damage. There are going to be people who are killed. And lift up his staff against you in the manner of Egypt. That is, you're going to be enslaved, just like Pharaoh enslaved your ancestors. He's going to come in and he's going to tread you down like the mire of the streets, but he's also going to enslave those who survive. Verse 25, the New Living Translation goes on, in a little while, my anger against you will end. This is not going to go on for a long time, God says, 3.5 years. Not going to go on a long time, but in a little while, my anger against you will end, and then my anger will rise up to destroy them. And the Eternal of hosts will stir up a scourge for him. That is the beast, okay, the Assyrian, will scourge for him like the slaughter of Midian at where? The rock of Oreb. Well, there it is again. At the rock of Oreb. As his rod was on the sea, that is to destroy the Pharaoh's control over Israel, just as his rod was on the sea, so he will lift it up, that is he, God, he will lift it up in the manner of Egypt. It shall come to pass in that day that his burden, that is the control of the beast, will be taken away from your shoulder and his yoke from your neck. So God says, I am going to do to him what was done to Pharaoh, except even worse. We are not told that Pharaoh died in the Red Sea. His army did, but God, again, eventually Pharaoh did die. All right, let's go back to Psalm 83 again and go to verse 13. Oh my God, again, these are the followers of Judaism primarily in the land of Israel. Oh my God, make them like the whirling dust, like the chaff before the wind. That is, sweep them away, clear them out of the land. As the fire burns the woods and as the flame sets the mountains on fire, so pursue them with your tempest and frighten them with your storm. That is, utterly destroy them, like the fires that burn the trees and everything that's on the ground. Verse 16, Tanakh goes on, cover their faces with shame so that they seek your name, O Eternal. Or the New Living Translation, I think, has this a little more clear. Utterly disgrace them until they submit to your name, O Eternal. May they be frustrated and terrified, disgraced and doomed forever. God inspired many of his prophets to prophesy that all of the Islamic nations that become part of this confederation, allied with the beast, will experience the retribution of the God of Israel. He is the one that's going to fight the battle. And of course, we know he does it in person. He comes out of heaven on a white horse, followed by the entirety of the first fruits on white horses to engage and to destroy. That will be the way it happens. In Ezekiel chapter 36, Let's read about the shame that's faced. Ezekiel 36 and verse 1. Here, I'll read from the New Living Translation again. Son of man, prophesy to Israel's mountains. That is, to the land of Israel, is what he's talking about here. Prophesy to Israel's mountains. Give them this message. O mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Eternal. This is what the sovereign Eternal says. Your enemies have taunted you, saying, Aha, now the ancient heights belong to us. Therefore, Son of man, give the mountains of Israel this message from the sovereign Eternal. Your enemies have attacked you from all directions, making you the property of many nations and the object of much mocking and slander. Therefore, O mountains of Israel, hear the word of the sovereign Eternal. He speaks to the hills and mountains, ravines and valleys, and to ruined wastes and long deserted cities that have been destroyed and mocked, or as the New International has here, plundered and ridiculed by the surrounding nations. That is, the nations that surround the land of Israel, which are all part of that alliance that we've been reading about. This, verse 5, is what the sovereign Eternal says. My jealous anger burns against these nations. God is saying this. Especially Edom. So Edom, number one. Edom, because they have shown utter contempt for me. By gleefully, or as the New International has, with glee. They've showed utter contempt for me, with glee and with malice in their hearts, taking my land for themselves as plunder. Therefore, prophesy to the hills and mountains, the ravines and valleys of Israel. This is what the sovereign Eternal says. I am furious that you have suffered shame before the surrounding nations. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Eternal says. I have taken a solemn oath, God makes this oath, that those nations will soon have their own shame to endure, just as verse 17 requested of Psalm 83. Now, Psalm 83, verse 18. Okay, they may suffer the shame, that they may know that you, whose name alone is the eternal, the all-living, the ever-living, that whose name alone is the eternal, that you are the most high over all the earth. Whereas today, at least the Islamic nations, well, Christ, he was just a prophet. He wasn't important. Muhammad was a lot more important. You know, they've been so, anyway, put down Christianity. They're killing all kinds of, at least what people think they're Christian in this world, because they profess Christ, but they don't do what he says. But at any rate, no, to them, the Most High is Allah, not the God of Israel. They want that name erased. We don't want to listen to this prevailing with El anymore. By the time God is finished pouring out his fury on them, they will be forced to admit that they have themselves blasphemed the name of God by worshiping the false god symbolized by the crescent. They're going to know. Other of God's prophets that came much later were inspired to give further details of the punishments that each of those Islamic nations must receive, along with the beast and the nations, again, allied with him or conquered by him. Let's go to Ezekiel 35. Let's go over some of these prophets in recordings, what they have recorded for us, that God inspired them. Ezekiel 35, verse 1, New International has, the word of the Eternal came to me, Son of man, set your face against Mount Seir. Again, remember that was the original territory that God allotted to Edom, to Esau, okay? To Mount Seir, prophesy against it, and say, this is what the sovereign Eternal says, I am against you, Mount Seir, and I will stretch out my hand against you and make you a desolate waste. Okay, this is what's going to happen. You're going to be a desolate waste. Desolate means nothing there. I will turn your towns into ruins, and you will be desolate. Then you will know that I am the Eternal. Remember Psalm 83:18? That they may know that you are the Most High. Okay, well, then you will know. Now, there are going to be so many of them that are dead, they may not know until they're raised up in the second resurrection, but they're going to know. They are going to absolutely know. In verse 5, Tanakh goes on, because you harbored an ancient hatred and handed the people of Israel over to the sword in their time of calamity, the set time for their punishment. Now, that ancient hatred we've gone through fairly recently, that ancient hatred is documented throughout Israel's history, whether we're talking about the armed conflict that took place in the days of Saul and David and Solomon and Jehoshaphat and Jehoram, all the way down to Ahaz, just constantly. Their ancient hatred will be the reason they welcome the beast and join forces with him when he surrounds Jerusalem, because they can see, if we're part of him, he's powerful enough, we're going to be able to take over the land. And all the beast is concerned about, he just wants Jerusalem. He wants Jerusalem, Mount Zion. That's what he wants, but the rest of the land, he'll turn it over to them. That's what's implied. Going on in verse 6, Tanakh goes on, assuredly, as I live, declares the Lord Eternal, I will doom you with blood. Better in the New English translation, I will doom you with bloodshed. I think the New Living Translation says a bloodbath. But I will doom you with bloodshed. Bloodshed shall pursue you. I swear that for your bloodthirsty hatred, bloodshed shall pursue you. That's what's going to happen. Your blood is going to be shed everywhere, wherever you are. Verse 7, I will make Mount Seir an utter waste, or I'll make it desolate, and I will keep all passers-by away from it. So God says he's going to remove all of Esau's descendants from the territories they control, bordering the land of Israel. Going on in verse 8, in the New King James, and I will fill its mountains with the slain. On your hills and in your valleys and in all your ravines, those who are slain by the sword shall fall. I will make you perpetually desolate, and your cities shall be uninhabited. Then you shall know that I am the Eternal. And he stresses this throughout this passage. You will know. You're going to know eventually. You're going to know who I am. Again, the devastation will be so complete that no matter where people may flee, as God pursues them, they will not be able to escape death. Now, the terms desolate and uninhabited in these verses refer to the absence of Esau's descendants, not to any others, because, again, we know from other prophecies that the Jews will eventually possess that area. We're told that the descendants of Judah are going to possess Mount Seir and all of the territory that was Edom's. Verse 10, because you have said, you're going to know that because you have said these two nations, speaking of the northern and southern kingdoms historically, you have said these two nations and these two countries shall be mine, and we will possess them, although the Eternal was there. Yes, the people were taken out. The northern kingdom, they were taken into exile by the Assyrians. The southern kingdom taken into exile by the Babylonians. But just because they weren't in the land, it was still God's land. It's still his, even though maybe his treasured ones weren't there. But again, these descendants of Esau will make the claim again when they become allies with the beast, that these two nations, this territory, it's ours. It belongs to us now. Verse 11, therefore as I live, says the Lord Eternal, I will do according to your anger and according to the envy which you showed in your hatred against them, and I will make myself known among them when I judge you. Verse 12, then you shall know that I am the Eternal. I have heard all your blasphemies which you have spoken against the mountains of Israel, saying, they are desolate, they are given to us to consume. Thus with your mouth you have boasted against me, and multiplied your words against me. Or as the New International has, you spoke against me without restraint. I have heard them. I've heard those words. The blasphemies of the Edomites centered around their celebrating the destruction of God's land, which he gave by promise to the descendants of Jacob, and the fact that the descendants of Esau think that the event of removing them from the land negated Esau's sale of his birthright, which made them, Esau's descendants, the rightful owners. No, that's blasphemy to think that. God never gave it to Esau. Verse 14, the New International translates, this is what the sovereign eternal says. While or when the whole earth rejoices, this is after Christ returns, establishes his kingdom, when the whole world, or while it rejoices, I will make you desolate, because you rejoiced when the inheritance of the house of Israel became desolate. That is how I will treat you. You're going to be made desolate. You will be desolate, O Mount Seir, you and all of Edom. Then they will know that I am the eternal. So this is stressed over and over again. Let's go back to Isaiah chapter 34. Isaiah 34 and verse 1. Come near, you nations, to hear, and heed, you people. Let the earth hear, and all that is in it, the world and all things that come forth from it. For the indignation of the Eternal is against all nations, and his fury against all their armies. He has utterly destroyed them. He has given them over to the slaughter. That's what's going to happen. Again, we've already read that back in Revelation 19. Also, their slain shall be thrown out. Their stench shall rise from their corpses, and the mountains, the New International says better, will be soaked with their blood. Verse 4. When does this happen? All the host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled up like a scroll. All their hosts shall fall down as the leaf falls from the vine, and as fruit falling from a fig tree. This is a reference to the sixth seal, back in Revelation chapter 6, verses 12 through 17. Okay, that's, again, the sixth seal announces the coming of the wrath of God, which is made up of 7 trumpet plagues, 7 calamities announced by the trumpets. He goes on in verse 5, for my sword shall be bathed in heaven, or simply appears. Revised English Bible, I think, brings it out better. It appears in heaven. How does it appear in heaven? Well, Revelation 19, verse 15, tells us that Christ comes and a sword is coming out of his mouth. So it's going to be seen. Okay, so a sword appears in heaven. Indeed, it shall come down on Edom and all the people of my curse. Who are the people of his curse? Again, we can go back to Exodus chapter 17. Amalek, the Amalekites, descendants of Esau. Okay, so it will come down on Edom and all the people of my curse for judgment. The sword of the Eternal is filled with blood. It is made overflowing with fatness, with the blood of lambs and goats, with the fat of the kidneys of rams. For the Eternal has a sacrifice in Basra, very important city in ancient Edom, and a great slaughter in the land of Edom. All right, go to Ezekiel chapter 25. We're not going to hit all of the prophecies, believe it or not, but we're going to hit enough of them that we see. We've gone over many of these before, but they need to be connected with Psalm 83. Here in verse 12 of Ezekiel 25, thus says the Lord Eternal, because of what Edom did against the house of Judah by taking vengeance, and has greatly offended or sinned, other translations would have, by avenging itself on them. Therefore, thus says the Lord Eternal, I will also stretch out my hand against Edom, cut off man and beast from it, and make it desolate from Teman. Dedan shall fall by the sword. He's going to be removed from all of the territories that he's had. Let's go to the minor prophets, to Joel. Joel chapter 3. Joel 3 and in verse 19. Egypt shall be a desolation. This is by the time The fury of God, the wrath of God is concluded. Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom a desolate wilderness because of violence against the people of Judah, for they have shed innocent blood in their land. God's going to do this because of the violence they've shown. There's no need for that. Let's go to Amos. Chapter 1, verse 11. One page over in my Bible. Amos 1, verse 11. Thus says the Eternal, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and for 4, I will not turn away its punishment, because he pursued his brother with the sword, number 1, and cast off all pity, number 2, and 3, his anger tore perpetually, or Tanakh says his anger raged unceasing. And then 4, he kept his wrath forever. But I will send a fire upon Teman, which shall devour the palaces of Basra. Now, again, there are many more scriptures that pertain to Edom. In fact, I think there are more against Edom than there are any of the other ultimately Islamic countries. Jeremiah. Let's go back to Jeremiah again, chapter 48. Jeremiah 48 and verse 42. And we read, and Moab shall be destroyed as a people, because he has magnified himself against the Eternal. Now this will be the fate of the descendants of Moab, because they will help Esau try to undermine God's will. That the older, what was God's will concerning Jacob and Esau? That the older would serve the younger. That was what God's will was. The same holds true for the descendants of Lot's other son. In chapter 49 here, verse 1, chapter 49 of Jeremiah, verse 1, concerning the Ammonites. So Moab and Ammon were the 2 sons of Lot. Concerning the Ammonites, this is what the Eternal says. Has Israel no sons? Has Israel no heir? Why then has Molech? Now Molech was the idol that was worshipped by the Ammonites. He was the primary god figure or whatever of the Ammonites. Why then has Molech taken possession of Gad? Why do his people live in its towns? But the days are coming, declares the Eternal, when I will sound the battle cry against Rabbah of the Ammonites. Now Rabbah of the Ammonites is Amman, Jordan today. Okay, that's where it is. It will become a mound of ruins, and its surrounding villages will be set on fire. Amman today is, I think I've read the population is like 5 million. It's, of course, where most of the population of Jordan lives, is in Amman, but it's going to be a heap of ruins by the time all is said and done. Then Israel will drive out those who drove her out, says the Eternal. And again, the rest of this chapter, chapter 49, includes more prophecies against Esau, but we're going to skip those. Let's go back to Ezekiel chapter 25. Ezekiel chapter 25, and we're going to go to verse 8 this time. Ezekiel 25:8. Thus says the Lord Eternal, because Moab and Seir say, look, the house of Judah is like all the nations. That is, we can take them. They're up for grabs just like any other land anywhere on the face of the earth. Just like the nation. Therefore, behold, God says, I will clear the territory of Moab of the cities on its frontier, the glory of the country, Beth Jeshemoth, Baal Meon, and Kirjath Jearim. All of those were border towns to the east and northeast of the Dead Sea in what is today Jordan, in that area. That's where those towns were. To the men of the east, I will give it as a possession, together with the Ammonites, that the Ammonites may not be remembered among the nations. Okay, just like Esau, not going to be any nation of Esau ever again. There won't be a nation of Moab. There won't be a nation of Ammon. Not be remembered. And I will execute judgments upon Moab, and they shall know that I am the Eternal. There it is again. The descendants of Moab and Ammon, along with the descendants of Esau who live in their ancient territory, Jordan and Syria, at the close of the age will be erased as nations when the kingdom of God is established on the earth. Verse 15, skipping down to verse 15, this is what the sovereign eternal says. The Philistines have exacted merciless revenge, showing intense scorn in their effort to destroy Judah with unrelenting hostility. Verse 16 from the Tanakh, assuredly, thus says the Lord eternal, I will stretch out my hand against the Philistines and cut off the Cherethites and wipe out the last survivors of the seacoast. I will wreak frightful vengeance upon them by furious punishment, and when I inflict my vengeance upon them, they shall know that I am the Eternal. There it is again. The Philistines, again, possess the ancient area that we call the Gaza Strip, which today certainly includes descendants of Esau, I believe primarily Amalek. I think they're mostly Amalekites. Cherethites, again, was probably the original name of the Philistines because it's used interchangeably, as we'll see. Let's go back to Amos in the Minor Prophets. We'll finish up in the Minor Prophets. Amos chapter 1, verse 6. Amos 1, verse 6. I'll read from the New International. This is what the Eternal says. For 3 sins of Gaza, even for 4, I will not turn back my wrath, because she took captive whole communities and sold them to Edom. I will set fire upon the walls of Gaza that will consume her fortresses. I will destroy the king of Ashdod and the one who holds the scepter in Ashkelon. I will turn my hand against Ekron till the last of the Philistines is dead, says the sovereign eternal. Now, there's more about the Philistines, or that territory of the Philistines, in Zephaniah chapter 2. Zephaniah chapter 2 and verse 5. Zephaniah 2:5. Woe to the inhabitants of the sea coast, the nation of the Cherethites, the Philistines. The word of the Eternal is against you, O Canaan, land of the Philistines. I will destroy you, so there shall be no inhabitant. The sea coast shall be pastures with shelters for shepherds and folds for flocks. The coast shall be for the remnant of the house of Judah. They shall feed their flocks there. In the houses of Ashkelon they shall lie down at evening, for the Eternal their God will intervene for them and return their captives. So something's going to happen to the Jews living in Israel today. They're going to be taken into captivity. That is, they're going to be enslaved and they're going to go into exile. We have to go to Joel chapter 3 to see this. Joel chapter 3 and verse 4. New Living Translation has, what do you have against me, Tyre and Sidon, and you cities of Philistia? Now again, Tyre and Sidon, Lebanon, where Hezbollah is. Philistia, the seacoast. The Gaza Strip, where Hamas is. What do you have against me? Are you trying to take revenge on me? To say that we're going to wipe out the name of Israel, prevailer with El? What are you trying to? Are you trying to take revenge on me? If you are, then watch out. I will strike swiftly and pay you back for everything you have done. You have taken my silver and gold and all my precious treasures and have carried them off to your pagan temples. You have sold the people of Judah and Jerusalem to the Greeks so they could take them far from their homeland. But I will bring them back. Again, we just saw in Zephaniah 2 verse 7 that God would return their captives, the captives of Judah. And here it says, I will bring them back from all the places to which you sold them, and I will pay you back for everything you have done. And we've already read how he's going to destroy every man. All of these prophecies emphasize what God must do to the descendants of Esau, Moab, and Ammon before they finally acknowledge him as the eternal God, the possessor of all the earth. And so that brings us then to the close of Psalm 83.